Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to week 3 of our unit. Throughout this week, we're going to be exploring poetry analysis. As a refresher, in week 1, we looked at various poems by poets and just noted the things that we saw in them. We talked about what we liked and what we didn't like. In week 2, we talked about poem structure and format, how poets specifically format their poetry for breaks, pauses, emphasis on certain words, how poets placed certain words in locations for mood and rhythm. In week 3, we're going to dig a little bit deeper with poetry analysis. We're going to be using the same standards for the last 2 weeks. Our essential question stays the same: what is poetry? However, this week we're going to read and explore different poems, but we're going to analyze the poetic techniques and devices used in each of them. We're also going to understand that poets choose their words very carefully. The first thing we need to do then is understand the literary devices. We've been exploring many of these all year, and as a refresher, I'm just going to review the ones on the board. A simile is a comparison of two unlike things using like or as. An example, the giant steps were like thunder. I'm comparing the giant steps to thunder. A metaphor is a comparison of two unlike things. However, it doesn't use like or as. An example is the giant steps were thunder. Alliteration is the repetition of sounds at the beginning of words. An example is she sells seashells. The letter S is repeated. Personification is when you give human characteristics to things that are not living. An example is the tree waved in the light. Trees aren't human, they can't really wave, but it's giving the vision that a tree's limbs are bending in the light. Imagery is when one creates images that appeal to the senses. You have 5 senses: taste, touch, smell, hear, see. Therefore, there are 5 different types of imagery. Olfactory imagery appeals to the sense of smell. Visual imagery appeals to your sense of sight. Gustatory, taste. Auditory, hearing, and tactile is touch. Mood is the feeling presented by the writer. A mood can be sad, happy, curious, joyful. Meter are the beats in a line. They can be stressed or unstressed. Certain poets follow meter format, others do not. An example would be Shakespeare. He uses a meter that is 5 stressed and 5 unstressed in each of his lines. Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth. It's from one of his famous plays, but you can count 5 times where I clap my hands and stress, and 5 times where I do not, for 10 lines, 10 beats in each line, but 5 are stressed and 5 are unstressed. Onomatopoeia is when words are used to represent sounds. Example, bam, crash, zap, buzz, meow. Rhyme is words that have the same end sounds. Hat, bat, shine, fine, see me. Note that when you're talking about rhyme, you can list them next to one another and separate them with a slash. Rhyme scheme is the pattern of rhyme in a poem. Stanza is the lines in a poem broken by a line break. And a symbol is an item used to represent something. For example, a shamrock is used to represent Ireland, a dove might represent peace, and a cross might represent a religion. Those are some literary devices that you should have been exploring throughout the year, but they apply specifically to our poems. Here's a poem by Robert Browning called Meeting at Night. It's a 2-stanza poem. There's a line break between the stanzas. Using some of the devices on our previous slide, I want you to kind of be detectives and search for some devices that you see. The gray sea and the long black land, and the yellow half moon large and low, and the startled little waves that leap in fiery ringlets from their sleep, as I gain the cove with pushing prow, and quench its speed in the slushy sand. Then a mile of warm sea-scented beach, 3 fields to cross till a farm appears, a tap at the pane, the quick, sharp scratch and blue spurt of a lighted match, and a voice less loud through its joys and fears than the 2 hearts beating, each to each. Now, going back to our lesson objective, we're going to learn how to analyze poetry. We're going to actually use Meeting at Night, the poem I've just read, to model this process. When one analyzes poetry, they look for poetic techniques and devices used by the poet. And we also need to understand what the poet means. So far what I see are two stanzas. I know that I know the word stanza, and I see two of them. Let's dig a little bit deeper and think about what the poet is telling us as the reader. Let's reread stanza 1. The gray sea and the long black land, and the yellow half moon large and low. Well, from the first two lines, if the sea is gray and the land is black, and there's a half moon that is large and low, I can infer that it's nighttime. And the startled little waves that leap in fiery ringlets from their sleep. Well, if I'm waking the waves, I must be in the water, and they're sleeping, so again, it must be nighttime. As I gain the cove with pushing prow, I have no idea what that means, and quench its speed in the slushy sand. I might look up the words cove and prow, and I'd probably find that it looks as though someone's rowing. Pushing prow, someone's rowing. So there must be some sort of boat or rowboat involved here. And quench its speed in the slushy sand. Well, I know to quench my thirst means to still my thirst. So if I'm quenching the boat's speed in the sand, then I must have arrived on land and the boat must stop. I must have quenched the speed or stopped the speed. So in stanza 1, it looks as though someone is traveling by boat at night and landed on the beach, because beaches are generally made of sand. That's stanza 1. Now bear with me, guys. This is long, but worth it. Then a mile of warm sea-scented beach, 3 fields to cross till a farm appears. Okay, let's go back to line 1. A mile of warm sea-scented beach. This person must have crossed a mile of sea-scented beach. So he must have traveled, or she must have traveled, a mile. Next, 3 fields to cross till a farm appears. Well, after they crossed a mile of the beach, they crossed 3 fields, and then they saw a farm. A tap at the pane. So someone's tapping at the pane, and if you don't know what a pane is, think of a window, the glass pane in a window. So someone's tapping at the pane. And then it says the quick, sharp scratch. A quick, sharp scratch, it's the sound of something, a scratch. And a blue spurt of a lighted match. Oh, when you light a match, if you've ever lit a match, it makes that scratch sound, so it must be referring to the scratch sound made by lighting a match. And a voice less loud through its joys and fears. There's a voice, someone's there. Then the 2 hearts beating each to each. So someone must have traveled all of this way to find his or her love and to be with the person in physical contact there. 2 hearts are beating each to each, meaning they're touching. It's a love poem. I get it. So these 2 stanzas here are about a person traveling in the middle of the night to find this other individual. That is the first step of analyzing any poem. You want to make sure that you understand what the poem means. Our next step is now to apply these literary devices and see what we can find within the poem that would show our ability to master these devices and locate them within a poem, and then ultimately to understand that poets do this on purpose to enhance their writing. So let's look. The gray sea and the long black land. Well, that is appealing to my sense of vision. So that is known as visual imagery. The poet's painting a visual picture for me of a gray sea and long black land. And the yellow half moon large and low. Well, the poet must be telling me that it's nighttime. And that's also visual imagery here. So I see a couple of examples of visual imagery. There's a half moon large and low, and it's yellow. And the gray sea and the long black land. That's visual imagery. The next line says, and the startled little waves that leap. Well, waves can't leap. So looking back at my list here, if waves are leaping, that must be personification, because things that aren't living can't do things that living things do. So waves that leap in fiery ringlets from their sleep, I'm going to guess is an example of personification. So I'm going to write personification. In fiery ringlets from their sleep. Fiery ringlets. That must be, they're fiery? Why would they be fiery? I'm not quite sure of the answer to that, but I know that's probably visual imagery as well. And they're sleeping. So again, it's visual imagery and it's personification. And quench the speed in a slushy sand. Well, slushy to me is a feeling. I can feel slushy sand. So I'm going to guess that slushy sand, knowing my knowledge of imagery, it's called tactile imagery because it's touch. It's describing the way something feels. So slushy sand is touch. Hey, also I see slushy and sand. You guys can recall what slushy and sand would be. This is an example of alliteration. So I'm going to note that here in my text as well, that's an example of, forgive me, I'm not very good at typing and talking simultaneously, that a mile of warm sea-scented beach. Well, that gives it away there. If it's sea-scented beach, going back to my list, that must be sea-scented, smell. That's olfactory imagery. Sea-scented beach. So I'm going to share here that sea-scented beach must be olfactory imagery. And sea-scented, that's another SS. Sea-scented, that's another example of alliteration here. So I might also put alliteration. And I also see warm. Warm is a feeling, so that's tactile imagery there. I could feel that warm. A tap at the pane. A tap, I can hear that tap. So that's an example of auditory imagery. A tap at the pane. A quick, sharp scratch. That's still the sound of a scratch. And I also see sharp scratch. There's another example of alliteration in this line. This poet uses lots of different devices in each of his lines. So, sharp scratch and blue spurt of a lighted match. I see visual imagery. Blue spurt, I can see the blue. And a voice less loud. That's again auditory imagery. A voice less loud through its joys and fears than the two hearts beating each to each. Well, if the two hearts are beating each to each, that's probably tactile because they're touching one another. So those are all the devices used in that poem. And I want to make sure Mrs. D. Mascola, or whomever's reading this, knows that the poem is about a lover who crosses the sea. What else does he cross? The beach, 3 farms, all to see his, we'll say his or her love because we're not sure if it's a male or female. And that's the meaning of my poem. What are some other devices? Let's go through. Do we see any similes or metaphors? I don't think I saw any similes or metaphors in this particular poem. We saw alliteration. We saw personification. We saw lots of imagery. What about the mood of the poem? Let's go back to this poem and talk about the mood. The mood of this poem is what? I think it's a love poem, so I think it's kind of a happy mood. It sounds like they're united at the end, so that makes it a happier poem. I did see the beats in a line. The gray sea and the long black land and the yellow... No, it doesn't really follow that. But I did notice something. The word land rhymes with sand. And the word low rhymes with prow. It's kind of forced rhyme there. And the word leap rhymes with sleep. So my rhyme scheme would be A, B, C, C, B, A. It's like inverted. A, B, C, C, B, A. That's kind of neat. A, B, C, C, B, A. Let me see about stanza 2. We have beach rhymes with each. We have appears that rhymes with fears. And we have scratch that rhymes with match. So I can definitely see a pattern of rhyme here. The first and last lines rhyme of every stanza. The second and fourth, and the third, the second and fifth and the third and fourth. So there's definitely a pattern of rhyme in this poem. I didn't see any onomatopoeia, the scratch of a lighted match, but that wasn't really onomatopoeia. I guess it could be onomatopoeia, scratch. There's definitely rhyme. There's definitely a rhyme scheme. A, B, C, C, B, A for both stanzas. And then D, E, F, F, E, D would be the rhyme scheme. And there are 2 stanzas, stanza 1 up here and stanza 2. So I might want to include stanza 1. And then I might include in here stanza 2. Okay. And again, you might want to put the rhyme scheme here. A, B, C, C, B. Bear with me, guys. I know this is lengthy, but... And then we start a new line. Since land doesn't rhyme with beach, even though the pattern repeats, with rhyme scheme we have to start a new letter because all the words that rhyme get the same letter. So each and beach would get D. Appears and fears would get E. And if you don't understand rhyme scheme, I highly recommend you attend class because we will be reviewing this. So I think I've covered all of the literary devices, and I think I know the meaning of a poem. And therefore, guys, guess what? You've successfully learned to do a poetry analysis. The next level then would be discussing why you think the poet used these certain characteristics or devices in the poem and how they affect the poem, but that's a different lesson. So this week in your assignments, when you're being asked to analyze poems, I want to see exactly what we've done on the board, from your blank poems to showing me that you know these devices. Thank you for bearing with me. I know this was long, but necessary.